just doing nothing more than standing in their kitchen and their bone breaks under their own weight and they fall to the ground. And that is a very different picture because it's easy to be like, well, I won't fall, but that's not what's happening.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that because that is something we all never think about. And that can happen in your 60s or
Yeah,
early 60s. And this is not that far from us. Or, I'm sure some of the
totally.
listeners now are definitely in their 60s. And it's time to pay attention to that. All right. Well, it's a real pleasure to have on again Selene Yeager. Welcome.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be back in your house, Sora. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so happy to see you again. I just connect with you so well. You're so easy to talk to. I think we can go on forever with our episodes
Yeah.
together. I'll have to reel it in because today we want to talk about strength and muscle, and you and your community are the queens of that. And I also totally sing the same mantra like you and so many other people, how to age strong,
Yep.
aging gracefully. Like it's kind of like, oh, I mean, it's for a certain person, but the gerontologist in me says we need to be strong. Now, why don't you tell me, why do you think a woman in this menopause transition particularly needs to focus on getting stronger?
Well, I would also say that aging strong also helps you age gracefully. I mean, truly, because without your muscle, you don't have good posture, you don't have good balance, you don't have all those things. Like, it does help you age with grace. So I'm just going to put that out there. But I think that women need to consider what happens to their muscle over time. And women specifically really, really need to think about this. Like, generally speaking, for adults, you're looking at adults start losing muscle arguably in their 30s, definitely by their 40s, about 3 to 8% every decade they're losing. And that loss accelerates when we get to our age, like about 50. Then you can be looking at 5 to 10% per decade after that. There becomes a more precipitous decline over time. And women, especially around the menopause transition, need to think about this because estrogen is anabolic. And people just don't know that. I didn't know that when we first started this show. You hear testosterone, 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 but estrogen stimulates muscle protein synthesis and it reduces muscle protein breakdown. So it helps you make and maintain muscle. And when it starts to decline, so does your muscle. And for women in the menopause transition specifically, that's anytime around in their 40s when they start the menopause transition or perimenopause. So early to late perimenopause, they can lose 10% of their skeletal, like their appendicular arms and legs muscle. That is a lot. That is an awful lot of muscle, and it takes your quality of life, which I'm sure we'll talk about with it. And we're sort of like you also then lose strength, right? Like with your muscle comes your strength. And even if you're thinking, oh, well, I don't play sports or I don't do heavy lifting, so it doesn't really matter, this little bit of 10%, what is that? It is your independence. When you lose muscle and you lose functional strength, you are not opening jars by yourself anymore. You're not carrying packages. You're not carrying groceries. You're not walking upstairs with ease. You're not even getting up and down out of furniture with ease. All of that diminishes. You have less energy. Your gait slows down. And it just becomes this downward spiral because then the less you move, the more precipitous your loss. And I just always encourage women to think about it that way because I think we've been conditioned to think about muscle and strength in terms of like sport activity, which is an audience that I talk to an awful lot, but it's way beyond that. It is way beyond that. And with this is important too. You put me on my soapbox immediately. So here we are. But with muscle and bone goes hand in hand. It's your musculoskeletal system. So when you're using your muscles and you have muscle, it is putting healthy stress on your bones, right? And again, in the menopause transition, just as it's a precarious time for muscle loss, women can lose 20% of their total lifetime loss during the menopause transition, during those 5 to 7 years around menopause. And that's no bueno. That's really bad because muscle's hard to make, bone is really hard to make. And we live a long time. Women live a long time. We could live well into our 80s easily. And that sets you up for you're looking at maybe 20 years of frailty. Postmenopausal women with reduced muscle mass are more than twofold more likely and nearly threefold more to fall and more nearly threefold more likely to break a hip. So you are most almost twice as likely to fall when you have low mass and then three times as likely to break your hip. And people don't realize how really dangerous that is. After age 65, half of women are expected to break a hip or a bone, and about 30% die in the first year. And it's all preventable. It's all preventable. And it is not your inevitable future to become a frail woman. We need to stop that discourse. We need to think about things differently.
Absolutely. And you rattled off all the stats that I absolutely love and are impressive. And it's kind of scary when you think about these numbers of you could actually die within the first year of a fall and fracture. And it's not necessarily always because of the fracture, but maybe complications that are happening in the hospital or
Infections.
infections. Exactly. So it's one of those things that we may not even imagine ourselves, because it's really hard to see ourselves as a 70-year-old or 80-year-old and imagine ourselves, but we don't start working out and doing all this stuff at that age. I mean, we can, obviously it's good if you haven't done, but it's better if we start a little bit earlier. And then on top of it, when we go through this transition, we're losing all of these hormones. And like you said, estrogen is anabolic. It helps us build the bones and
Yeah.
the muscles. And they, like you said, they go hand in hand. And so if you're not doing anything to support that loss, really you're going down this downward spiral. And it just emphasizes more the importance of doing the work. And I know sometimes for some people it's scary. They've never lifted weights. They're not really sure where to start. But it's worth getting started at some point.
I want to add because this is something that I didn't know when I started doing this podcast, like my Hip Play Now Pause podcast and some of the work that I do, is that in conversations with Dr. Vonda Wright, who just wrote that paper, The Musculoskeletal Syndrome of Menopause, but what she does is bones. That's been her life. And I never appreciated. You hear about women falling, breaking hips, right? And we think that that is a causal effect thing. We stumble, we fall. But she made it clear, right? She made it clear to me that women are just doing nothing more than standing in their kitchen and their bone breaks under their own weight and they fall to the ground. And
Mhm.
that is a very different picture because it's easy to be like, well, I won't fall, but that's not what's happening.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is something we all never think about. And that can happen in your 60s or
Yeah,
early 60s. And this is not that far from us. Or, I'm sure some of the
totally.
listeners now are definitely in their 60s. And it's time to pay attention to that. So it's worth getting started. It's worth not only, like we mentioned, to get the muscle mass, but we want strength, and we want to be able to open jars. We need to carry our groceries, etc. And also power is also very important. But before we get into that little piece, I also want to mention as well that muscle, is my understanding, again, you correct me if I'm wrong, so much about this, is that it helps us with insulin resistance that comes
Oh,
with this
oh boy.
perimenopause transition, where we can't eat as the same things as we used to. And building more muscle helps with taking in that food and processing it and metabolizing it, right?
We've always tended to think of muscle as sort of this mechanical thing that pulls on your bones and puts you in motion, right? Like that, it was a very simplistic way to look at it. But you really need to think about it as an organ because it is an endocrine organ. And we'll talk about that in many different ways. But research across the board has shown an inverse association between muscle strength and chronic disease, all-cause mortality, and cardiovascular death. And resistance exercise, which increases strength and muscle, significantly improves those things. Cardiovascular disease reduces all-cause death. And a lot of it, as you just alluded to, comes down to that piece, that metabolic health piece. Muscle processes a lot of glucose. It processes a lot of blood sugar. So if you have more muscle mass, you're able to improve your insulin sensitivity and decrease your diabetes risk. Strength training, which again is what you do to build muscle, and that boosts that glucose uptake. Like, so strength training is really good for blood glucose clearance too, because it increases glucose transporters like glucose transporter type 4 or GLUT4. It improves mitochondria function. It improves the function of your blood vessels through nitric oxide release. So it's really good for your blood pressure, which can also go up at this time of life. It generates energy just to exist. It burns fat. There's been good research on postmenopausal women specifically, how resistance training reduces visceral abdominal fat in women. It lowers inflammation in postmenopausal women. And not for nothing, it really can help with injury prevention with this group, because you're not just strengthening your muscles and your bones, but those connective tissues also get stronger. And I hear from women all the time, and I'm one of them, that any aches and pains kind of go away when they start strength training, because their joints are more supportive and they're getting more strength in those tendons and ligaments as well. So yeah, it does a whole lot more. Not
Yeah.
that that's not enough to be strong, my friends, but it does a whole lot more than that.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's so much, it's a lot more things that we're not uncovering, but to remind people as well, we go to the gym or we lift weights and we increase our muscle mass, but we also have to feed it. we
Oh
need
yeah.
we need to eat and we need to eat protein. And one of the great things, I eat a ton. Like people see how much I eat and they're like, and I'm only five
I'm an
four,
eater too.
and they're like, whoa, where are you packing that stuff in? But muscle is expensive. So we
Yep.
need to feed it. And you could be training all day long, but if you're not getting in the protein and the nutrients and
Yep.
everything we need, including carbohydrates,
Yes, they go together.
you're not going to be able to repair and rebuild. So it's another point. And that's why I love the benefits of muscle is that I get to eat a little bit more.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And that's why our generation especially has come up, and I see it all the time, and I know you do too, this restrictive idea around food, like restricting and fasting, like how small can you make your eating window or your feeding window? This
Drives
whole
me nuts.
idea, we push about against that so hard because it's just diet culture following us. Women have been deeply, deeply conditioned to be as small as possible. Like, do men have a size zero? Do they? Is there a size zero? Somebody show me a man size zero anything. Do they? No,
I
no.
don't think so.
I didn't think so. Crickets. But about 10 years ago, it was super vogue to be a freaking size zero. And I've heard this rumblings that like heroin chic is coming back, like the whole Kate Moss, right? And I'm like, what are we even doing here? This culture has been like pushing us, especially in our generation, to be as tiny as possible. And that leads us to be frail and to break. And I'm glad, like, my daughter's 22, and I see that that generation is not quite getting hammered with that messaging quite the same way. But there are 100% women in my audience, and I'm sure in this audience right now, who have low bone mass and maybe even are osteoporotic because of the way we came up restricting. And now people are telling them to restrict even more. And I've had on lots of metabolic experts on my show and people talking about fasting. And one of the things that we really, really need to consider is that when you look at the research on fasting and time restricted eating, when you look at that kind of weight loss that it produces, some studies, and I was looking them up right before we got online, have shown that 65% of that weight loss can be muscle. We
Yeah.
cannot afford that. We cannot afford that. And something that so many experts talk about too that gets lost and is really important, Zora, is that the devil here is that, okay, so say you restrict and you lose that weight and then you lose that much muscle and then you cannot restrict like that forever. Nobody can eat in a 6 hour feeding window. Like, it just doesn't, it's not life. It doesn't work that way. And then when they regain, because it's not if, it's when, that comes back as adipose tissue. That comes back as fat. You're not regaining muscle. And now you have a suppressed metabolic rate. So your floor is lower and
Mhm.
you're fighting that. Like to try, it's you're setting yourself up for this vicious cycle that you cannot get out. And the more muscle you keep losing in those rotations of weight loss and gain, the lower that rate. You're just setting yourself up for not a good, healthy future.
Not only the metabolic issue that you're talking about, and I love that word that you use. I think when I interviewed one time, you called it muscle is your metabolic Spanx. And it's absolutely true. And that's okay. That's one thing, get your metabolism running. And metabolism is so much more than just, okay, burning through the energy of the food.
Yeah.
But I always remember Dr. Walter Longo, who is known for the fasting mimicking diet, caloric restriction. He's in this longevity aging space. And he was one of my professors when I was studying gerontology. And he said, it's better just to be overweight and never change than the yo-yo dieting stuff for longevity. If you want to live a long, healthy life, better to just like stay as you are than actually do this yo-yo stuff. And I don't remember the stats.
The yo-yoing is not good for you. The more research I look on that, and for all these reasons, like it really does kind of mess you up.
The question, actually, we mentioned the fasting thing. And I really don't know why we still have women dieting and fasting to quote unquote lose weight. And they're not focused on building muscle. And I really wonder why this is still there. And especially if you want to bring in the weight loss peptides like Ozempic and Mounjaro, this is what's how they're working is they're appetite suppressants and it does a lot of other things too. And I don't want to demonize it. I know it's great for a certain population, but it seems whenever somebody I know goes on this, I'm like, just prioritize your protein, get your calories in. I know you're not going to be hungry, but you got it. But it's so easy to lose muscle mass. And I see more people doing it wrong than doing it right. And even somebody yesterday I was speaking to, and she said she was testing out, I think it was a menopause even website. I don't remember the name or anything like that. I don't think she even said the name, but where you can go and get your hormones and some consultations. And she filled out the form basically saying, oh, I want to lose 10 pounds and blah, 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 put in all her stats and thinking she's going to get some hormone therapy, maybe some, estrogen or testosterone. And it actually spit out a prescription for Ozempic.
I'm hearing that more and more.
She was like, well, wait a second. First of all, it's not what I asked for, but two, you're not even going to guide me on this. You're just going to prescribe this. And that's where some of these things go wrong.
I am hearing that a lot too, and it's troubling.
Yeah.
It is troubling. Because to your point, I mean, and again, I am with you. I do not want to demonize these drugs. I think that they have a very important role to play in our society and for many women. That is great. We have to be careful with them, and we have to not use them you're seeing this for people who are otherwise metabolically healthy and who they just want to lose that 10 pounds or want to lose whatever. And you just have to be careful because of what we're talking about with muscle and bone loss. At the Menopause Society meeting, I mean, there was a woman who gave a presentation on this and was talking about how specifically with those GLP drugs that she is seeing them, because unless you stay on it like literally your whole life, and a lot of people can't afford to or don't want to, or the side effects become too much, as many things prevent them from staying on it forever. She was saying too that they're seeing like not only the muscle loss, but she's like, we're seeing them just have this suppressed metabolic rate from their brain. Like something within the brain can't because they work in your brain. She is very concerned what we're going to see 15 years down the road from people who are now in worse metabolic shape than they were prior to using the drugs. We just have to be careful, like who uses them, why they're using them. Everybody needs to be very informed about them.
Yeah. Let's move to the differences among muscle mass, muscle strength, and then muscle power, because we don't seem to give enough attention to the muscle power and strength. We're all just about hypertrophy, assuming that it all comes together at the same time. And if anybody's been following me for more than a minute, they know that I've been struggling with osteoarthritis. I just got my total hip replacement, and I have maintained my muscle mass in the last 2 years without doing intense exercises, just the rehab stuff. And it's kind of mind blowing. Even I'm like, wow, okay. And I've done a lot of things to do that. So I've maintained the body composition, but I would argue that with the strength and the power, which I miss very much. And I think that's my next step, is once I'm able to do that. So why don't you explain the differences?
So, very simple way to think about it is muscle mass is as it sounds. It's the physical amount of muscle tissue you have in your body, which includes not just the numbers of fibers. You have like type 1 fibers, which very simplistically speaking are your speed fibers, and type 1, which are your endurance fibers, and also the size of those fibers, which we think about as hypertrophy. But you can have, and it's sort of the saying used to be like, your muscles are all show, no go. But you can have kind of plump muscle fibers that aren't necessarily without a lot of strength. So it sounds counterintuitive, but you can, because there's a lot that goes into strength. So strength is how much force you can generate with that muscle. And there's a lot going on there too. There's neuromuscular connections that happen with there. Your muscle fibers are bundled into motor units and your brain connects to them, and how many that they can fire at the same time in synchronicity to create a contraction. All of that stuff is trainable, and all that stuff is determinant of your strength. So you don't necessarily have to be big to be strong. And as a cyclist, that's a lot of what we do, is we train more for strength and power. Endurance athletes do that all the time, than necessarily worrying about like bulking up the muscles as much. And this is all like on a spectrum, of course, right? Like any strength training you do is going to work all of these systems for the most part. And then power is just the ability to exert force rapidly. So it's to put that strength into motion with some speed. As we mentioned, the whole menopause transition brings the loss of muscle in general, but it also is powerful type 2 fibers sort of go away first, and you end up, like, proportionally speaking, having more endurance type 1 fibers. So again, you can lose some of that speed, you can lose some of that power, and I will keep drilling this home for people who do not care about sports because this goes beyond sports. If you're walking down the sidewalk and you catch your toe on like a little lip of a curb or something and you go flying, having muscle power, it gives you the ability to react quickly and catch yourself and not fall. Like, that's a very practical thing to be able to have. It's not all about doing like how much your box jumps are, or like all of the how fast you can swing a bat. It's not just about that, but being able to synchronize your muscles quickly and powerfully is so good for you in life.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because I call myself living in an 80-year-old body. And so it just, because 80-year-olds will be in a different thing when we get to 80. But honestly, I felt really vulnerable. Just crossing the street made me nervous. Like, if I knew I didn't have the power to get across the street very fast. So I was one of those,
Wow.
let go, go.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's
Yeah,
a
but how does
horrible.
that feel?
It's
Like,
it's so horrible. I think this has been such a learning lesson for me, because I used to be a little cocky about older adults, like, just come on, just gotta
yeah,
move,
yeah,
just do it. And in fact, sometimes we can't. And well, you hopefully overcome that. And that's what I'm doing right now. But it is you feel very vulnerable. You feel very scared. If anybody was, I would, if I were walking down the street at night, I got scared. I was a total target. Anybody want to, rob me? I can't do anything. Whereas before, I would almost train, I would run, I'd go running on a treadmill thinking, okay, this is really practical. If anybody starts chasing me, I can outrun them. It's kind of a ridiculous thing, to think about, but
we're all women. It's fine.
I guess it's just part of being female. You
Yeah, it
want to
is.
be, yeah, strong, and be able to defend yourself. So it is practical to have the power and then the strength. And again, I couldn't pick up things, I couldn't do things like I used to.
Yeah.
I travel, I'm a nomad. I towards the end, before the surgery, I was like, I can hardly carry my carry-on.
Let
Like,
alone put it in the overhead bin, right?
yeah, and you're asking for help, and it's just like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Honestly. But it's I got a taste of what it's like to be in that position, and believe me, it is very uncomfortable. So do not wait to start working on your strength, your power, and your mobility, agility, all this stuff as well. It's not to forget about that. It's really, really important, all of those.
Yeah.
So let's talk about training and how to get, is there anything that we can do that gives us all of these gains all in one?
Well, resistance training is your friend. There's different ways to do it, but it really is important for women. And yes, men sometimes do this too in the gym, but women really, research finds, do not lift heavy enough. There's just this tendency to very much underestimate the weight you should be using. And when they've done studies and allow women to self-select like what weight they should be using, it a couple studies I found were like 50 to 53% of their one repetition max is what they picked. Is something right.
Whoa.
And that is just, I mean, yes, if you lift that weight over and over and over until you can't anymore, you'll probably break down your muscle fibers and get a little hypertrophy, right? Like that'll probably work, but it's just too light for strength development. It just is. And so let's talk estrogen a bit again here, Zora, because I think when people really understand the why, it helps inspire them to do the what, you know? So estrogen is essential for regulating your satellite cell function, which what does that mean? Satellite cells are your muscle stem cells. They're called satellite cells because they orbit around the muscles of fiber cells, and they just help us maintain our muscles. When we lose estrogen, we lose the stimulation for those stem cells for muscle building. And there was actually a study in 2019, it was really interesting, that showed that when researchers removed estrogen from mice, their stem cells dropped by 30 to 60%.
Wow, that's a lot.
And we are not mice. I always like to see that they
Yeah.
do something in women. So the study also included a collaboration with scientists, I think it was in Finland, who performed muscle biopsies on women shortly before and then after the transition to menopause, when we just talked about you can lose 10% of that appendicular. And those researchers found that the number of satellite cells correlated very strongly with changing serum estrogen levels.
Mhm.
So, like, resistance training, especially heavy lifting, is the best way to pick up where the estrogen is leaving off and really stimulate and generate those satellite cells so that you can keep making and maintaining some of that muscles. It's also very good for your bones. As we said, those two things go hand in hand. We also talk about weight, and there were some studies that I have pulled in the past few months that have found, interestingly, that higher load resistance training is, and I'm quoting the study now, a critical factor in the body recomposition of postmenopausal women. They have found that we just respond, and again, I think it probably comes down to that, we just have less estrogen stimulus, so we really need that strong stimulus for reducing that adipose, that belly fat that everybody talks about. Like it does seem to be that that is the ticket for working that. So lifting heavier, that's like 85% of that one repetition max. Lower repetitions, higher loads. And that's not to say that every single thing you do needs to be like that, but your big lifts, which means your whole body lifts, like a squat, a deadlift, a press, is where you want to do that kind of like heavy lifting. And then there's accessory lifts that sort of help with your whole body, and those can be done at like a higher repetition range and a bit of a lower weight. And if you do those things, that's a really nice recipe for all of the stuff that you're talking about. And if you want to talk power, because I think that's important, there was a really good piece in Scientific American, I think it was last year, talking about high velocity resistance training. You can think of it as jump training, just squat jumps, that kind of thing. Or if you're doing a squat with some weight, like just bursting up as quickly as you can. That is really, really good for building power. And it also does seem to be especially good for older adults and women for maintaining muscle. So that's the bird's eye view.
Oh, wow. Okay, you get it. That's awesome. So a lot of it boils down to the right strength training. Then I remember I want to add this to your research as well, because I remember interviewing Menno Henselman. He's a guy from Holland, actually. It was
Hmm.
really interesting. He's all about the research. Like he just breaks down research all the time, and he's all about muscle. And he did mention, I asked him about the osteoporosis, and he mentioned that the you can build muscle with lower weights, higher repetition, fine, but you don't have enough weight to actually bend the bone. And he mentioned something about bending the bone has to be like
Outstanding point.
slightly bent to trigger bone remodeling.
That is such an excellent point because yes, your bones need more load than that because that's what I was saying, like with the lower weights and the higher repetitions, you're literally breaking down muscle fibers. I mean, that's microscopic tears. If you eat your protein and you take care of yourself, then that goes in there and it repairs and the muscle gets a little plumper and it gets a little bigger. But to your point, your bones aren't really working that way. Like they need like true like load to really get stimulated to build. So that's an outstanding point.
I like to mention that when I'm at the gym, when I could lift heavy and do all this stuff, which I will eventually,
It's gonna be back. You'll
it's
be back.
coming soon. I would literally be groaning. Like I would be the woman in the back, be like it sounds like sex noises or something, but it was heavy. And I would have a trainer obviously follow me because I'm not that good where I feel like I can take a really heavy load and do it by myself. I always like somebody to be
Oh yeah.
watching me. But it got to that point. I was like, I think it's got to be I got to be grunting a little bit. But I don't know if that's just me or is that in your community? Do you see that happening a lot? Because I'm the only one in the gym doing this.
Well, no, I mean, I think that kind of, I mean, I am sure that I do it as well. Like that kind of load, you are using your bracing, so you're building up like pressure, abdominal pressure, and like that's a release that it works. I mean, you hear like it's the same kind of thing you hear with like Steffi Graf and her tennis swing, right? Like
Oh
that when
yeah.
you release that kind of power, I mean, yes, that's just the release of all of that. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't feel bad about it.
So that gives people a little clue because they may go, well, how much is heavy? And again, it's not start lifting heavy from day one. You gradually build
Yeah.
up to it.
Yeah,
So
especially if you've not lifted.
yeah. So when you get to that point where you're lifting pretty heavy, yeah, you're making some of these noises, but also I try to explain that the last rep or two are really quite difficult. You're not doing this easy. And we're only talking about maybe 5 or 6 sets, but
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, what are you finding as a marker to help women figure out what is heavy enough?
Yeah, so I mean, there are lots of really great online calculators for this too that people can use, but I mean, generally speaking, it's you can use your perceived exertion with this. Reps in reserve is what they call it in weight training, and you just don't want to be able. You should be able to when you're done with, say, you're doing 5 sets of 5 reps, which would be sort of a classic scheme, right, for
Mhm.
building that kind of strength. Like you should probably be able to do another rep, but you wouldn't have good form. You're probably strong enough to eke out one, maybe two, but like your form would be falling apart. So that's the idea. Like and you do get a feeling for it as you lift. Like, this is what I can do for 5 strong, good form. If I try another one, I think it's all going to fall apart. And I think that's just sort of like your good benchmark for what
And
heavy
when
feels
you,
like.
that's great. That's a good way to do it. And you're doing it on your own. When I'm doing it with a trainer, that trainer is usually always going, come on, come on, come on, come on. Let's get one more. And they can tell when you're going to have bad form. When they see the bad form, they're like, okay,
Right.
you're done. But they can't eke out like maybe one or one
A
more.
trainer will get more out of you, as always. Like when I work with a coach, and I always work with a coach, your central governor might be like, "You're fine," but they can see how easily you have done or how hard it has been for you to do the reps you've just done, and they can see when you've got another one in the tank.
Yeah.
They're trained for that.
So let's revise building muscle. We need to get strength training in and gradually work up to it. We need to eat the protein. And then you mentioned estrogen is anabolic, helps building muscle. But what does this mean? Would you recommend her to start taking estrogen or HRT with the progesterone, obviously? Or because we know a lot of women who don't, and they got plenty of muscle and strength, but
Totally.
you
The
know, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was going to bring it up at some point. Anyway, the research is we don't have a ton of research, on postmenopausal women resistance training, period. This is still nascent field, but there has been some research suggesting that when women are using estrogen therapy, specifically transdermal estrogen, that they have an increase in muscle mass in response to progressive resistance training. It's interesting though that doesn't always, in the research I've seen, correspond to strength. So It's really hard to tease this stuff out, to be honest with you. It's not, I will say this, it's not a magic pill for that. There's lots of great things that estrogen and hormone therapy does. It may help, but it's not necessarily going to. It will not send you back to premenopausal state. That's a given. But if you're on it, it could be a benefit. I don't know that I'd be like, this is the thing that should push you over the line. I don't necessarily think we have the evidence to show that, but it could be a side benefit.
It's great that we spoke about estrogen because the go-to when you think about muscle mass is testosterone.
Testosterone.
and
Yep.
and we now know, yes, estrogen has a lot to do with it. But I think it's like all let's say there's three components: eating the protein and getting enough food in there, nutrients, and then building the muscle mass through exercise and the estrogen. It's never one. You can't just eat
Never one thing.
protein and then expect muscle mass. You can't just take the estrogen and then expect muscle mass. The way I see it working is, and again, I have to see if there's research on this, is that, well, perhaps if you are taking estrogen because you're having hot flashes and you're having struggling, well, you're going to get a better night's sleep. And then when you have a better night's sleep, you have more energy, and then you're going to go to the gym and you're going to probably lift heavier and a bit better.
No
And
question.
then you feel like eating the protein, and it just kind of
There's
spirals.
no
Maybe it's not,
question that it can
yeah.
work that way.
Yeah.
No
Yeah, so
question.
it's indirectly working if that's what
Totally.
you're looking for. Yeah, it's never one thing. It's the combination of all that stuff, and perhaps it helps in many other ways just to support what you need to be doing anyways, right? Which you find
Totally.
hard to do if you're struggling with every single menopausal symptom
Or
on the.
mood or any of that. 100%. I 100% am on board with that. It's interesting that you bring up testosterone because that research isn't as clear as you would think either. Like women, some suggest that you really need super physiological levels to see actual benefits, and you don't want to be doing that
There's a price
for
to
many
pay.
reasons.
You don't want to have male pattern baldness. You don't want to have acne, hairs growing out of the place, deepening of the voice, clitoris growing. I mean,
And not in a good way, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
some of it is irreversible. So we don't want to go too far. But I do understand that testosterone can be a motivator. It helps us with motivation. I don't know if you found any research on that, but it's helps you get going.
Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to be steeped in the testosterone research, but I have seen that. I think, oh boy, but as we've mentioned, there's never just one thing. So I'm always like, where does that fit into the individual woman's picture? Every woman needs to be assessed individually to see if that is a missing ingredient that would help her, I guess is the way I would look at it.
Yeah, you want to test all this stuff because in the training that I did with the Institute of Bioidentical Medicine, we did this program. They explained that women very often keep their testosterone through this transition, and
Yeah,
it stays up. It can stay up for a good 2 years post menopause. Eventually it'll go down, but it's not like estrogen progesterone where it's
right.
just taking this steep decline. So you may be surprised actually how much testosterone you still have and don't need it. So
Totally.
get tested, figure that piece out with your doctor. All right, let's move on. We had this email back and forth, and you started to talk about myokines. And this is
Mm.
actually great in your newsletter. Everybody go sign up to the newsletter. We'll have that in the show notes as well. And let's explain what are myokines and why do we need to pay attention to these more than ever during this menopause transition.
I think myokines are so exciting. I mean, I am a
Your new
geek.
love.
They are my new love. And they've started to come up at the Menopause Society meeting too, which I love to see. And they're really relatively new. Within the past, not that they're new in our bodies, we've had them since we've been humans, but they've just started to really discover they're peptides or proteins or sort of however you want to think about them, but they're basically these substances, these proteins that your muscles produce during contraction. And they answer a lot of questions like we've been talking about, like why is muscle important? What does it do? They're signaling molecules. So they play roles in communication with other organs in your body, like your fat tissue and your liver and your brain and your bones and your immune system. And they improve your health on just so many levels, and including how we process glucose, which I forgot about. I'll give you a couple examples of one. There's one, it's called Clotho. It's like named after the Greek goddess who spins the thread of life. They all have these great names too. But it helps protect against the loss of skeletal muscle mass. It's good for your heart and your brain. There's one that's named after the Greek messenger goddess Iris called Irisin. And irisin has come up a few times at the Menopause Society meeting because it actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and it could increases the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which has been called the miracle grow of the brain. And that helps preserve, which is really important this time of life, cognitive function, reduces the risk of cognitive decline. It also helps convert white fat to brown fat, which is really interesting. Yeah, because your brown fat is more metabolically active and burns more energy. And all of this is really good for midlife women because, again, we're losing these things. We have more adipose tissues. We're losing our metabolism. Our brain health can take a hit. Our skeletal muscle can take a hit. So, like, and also estrogen loss can mess with our myokines. So the the best thing we can do is use our muscles, which is what produces myokines, and especially resistance training. And it's, man, they're just really interesting. I find the whole research of that so fascinating because that is how you see the connection because people would be like, well, why does resistance training seem to help help with brain health and dementia? And everybody thought it was kind of simplistic, like, well, you exercise more, you just have more blood going to your brain, but it's so much more than that. There's like these little miraculous myokines doing their work, literally
Incredible.
building your brain.
So the more, is it the more muscle mass or strength, I'm not sure, that you have that increases the number of myokines, or are they kind of a set thing? Do you know?
No. I mean, if you lose muscle mass, you lose your myokine production. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be like a giant bodybuilder kind of
Yeah.
person, but but having healthy muscle that you are regularly contracting and challenging is the best way to produce myokines. I think would be the best way to talk about it.
Oh, I can't wait to do a whole podcast on myokines. God,
You should. I mean,
find an expert. Did
they're
you do
so
one on
interesting.
some? Have you had an interview with
I have
somebody?
not done one specifically on myokines because they've come up. I had Luisa Nicola who talked about Ireland on, and I've had the like other people bring them up. But the more I learn about them and the more I see them, I'm like, this is gold. This research is going to go very far. There was another one I was just reading about CTSB, which I think is Cathepsin, some of the I don't Cathepsin B. It's like irisin, but it also helps regulate neurogenesis, which is improved with improved memory. And that's what they think is one of the drivers behind the cognitive benefits of like running. It's just fascinating
Wow.
stuff. Yeah.
The first time I heard about Clotho was, I think, from Liz Parrish. I did an episode with her ages ago on gene therapy. And
Hmm.
so they were injecting, this is all in the longevity and aging
Yeah.
space, injecting Clotho and to improve health. And these are people who have serious issues. These are not just people who want to be metabolically more healthy. But it was the first time I heard about that. And I didn't realize that was a myokine.
It is a myokine. And Dr. Von der Wright, I don't know, she is the one. If you've ever seen the slide that shows a 40-year-old triathlete, it's like cross sections of muscles, it's all over the place. So you
Yeah.
have like a 40-year-old triathlete, and it looks like this wonderful, like beautiful piece of steak. And then you have a sedentary 70-year-old, I think it is, and there's almost no muscle left. It's a lot of adipose tissue. And then there's a 7-year-old triathlete, and you really can't tell the difference between the slide of muscles between that person and the 40-year-old. It's very stark image of like why you should keep moving. But interestingly, when I was talking to her, she was like, and they're like those 70-year-olds had the same levels of circulating clotho as younger people. Like so it's there's it's if you're not convinced to strength train for any other reason, like these kind of anti-inflammatory brain building health promoting benefits of resistance training, everybody should be doing it just for that. If they even if they're just like, oh, I don't care how strong I am.
There's so many reasons. It is, yes, strength training or just building muscle is quite it's close to the magic bullet, I think,
It
as you can
really
get.
is. I mean, there's nothing, it really, really, really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All kinds of exercise, to be honest. I never like to push people in a corner and say you should only be doing strength training, or you should only be doing yoga, or you should only be doing walking. I mean, they're all great. So I
Yeah.
love to, at least me personally, I do it all. I just rotate things to try to be a little bit more well-rounded, because I see the benefits for all of these things. And I may like some more than the other, but I still do the ones that I'm not very good at. And
Oh yeah, no, I agree with
yeah.
that. But I also I will say I am of the mind that strength training is a non-negotiable piece at a certain point in your life. Just
Yeah.
because you're losing it if you don't do strength training. And it will support those other things. Like I I do not love necessarily the act of strength training. I'm an endurance sport person by heart. I'd rather be on my bike than doing anything else.
Me too.
But I 1000% am better at those other things when I am strength training. I feel more powerful. I can hold more weight in a backpack as I am going backpacking. I can ride my bike better up a hill. All the stuff that is truly important to me, strength training enables. So it
Wow.
is, yeah, it is worth it for that.
Okay, let's figure out how we're going to get in more strength training into our lives. And there's the options of to do it yourself, get a trainer, but we also have the strong program, or it's called strength, it's called strong, right? Or strength
Yep,
program.
strong.
Strong. And this is a course that I just went through, really took a great look at it to see what's in it. And this is by the womensperformance.com group. And Selene, I guess you helped put a little bit this together, or what was your role
Yeah, I
in
mean
that?
it's under the Feisty umbrella, so we're all involved in all things Feisty. So that it's under the women's performance arm of the Feisty Media umbrella. And they developed this course mostly because we keep telling women all of the things that you and I have just talked about. And so many women, including because our audience is quite active, has a lot of endurance athletes in it, has a lot of triathletes, has a lot of cyclists and runners who never, even if they played sports growing up, and I played field hockey, but we never learned to lift. That what just wasn't part of the zeitgeist of our coming up. And even in our 20s, like we just walked right by the guys in the funny pants and the Gold's Gym doing their weight, right? Like
Yeah, that
we
was like the
weren't
guys section. Like there's,
totally
we were in the running, trying to burn fat by running on the
on the
treadmill. And
Stairmaster or whatever the hell. Yeah. So women are just like, okay, I got the message. Check. But then they just really don't know, especially if you're talking about a barbell. I mean, you don't have to barbell lift, but you know, barbells are pretty badass. And I'll say, like, I was very skeptical. And once I got under a barbell, I was like, oh, I get it now. Like it has a different stimulation and it makes you feel really good, honestly. But anyway, but people just didn't know where to start. Were and just wanted somebody to take them through the whole process. Like, this is the why, this is the how, and this is like they get a 16-week training plan that builds them up to that. So they get 4 weeks of body weight, 4 weeks of dumbbell, 4 weeks of barbell, so that they have that nice progression that would be I just think is really hard to do with yourself. And it's built around the basic movements that we talked about that you would use with a heavier lift, like a squat and a deadlift and a bench press, you know, that kind of thing with some core training. So it's just a comprehensive way to get even if you lift now but you've only ever done sort of like easy dumbbell exercises, like I just recommend it because it gives you that confidence to be like, okay, like I know how to, like I can walk into that room that before I didn't walk into and what you're doing. And there's videos for form. I think that women, if they're at all intimidated, a course like that is really really useful.
it's a great course. And I was so happy to see some of the people I interviewed there, like Dina Griffin, and it was Carla DiGirolamo. And these are people I trust, and the whole Feisty Media team. I know you guys are on it with proper training and how we should be doing things. I was happy to see that there was a section even on breathing and how to breathe
Yeah.
when you lift weights. Super important. So it was a great course. I have the plan. So when I'm
Mm,
ready, I want to follow the 16-week course.
there you
And
go.
yeah, and that will help me build up the strength as well and get to where I need to be. But it was really detailed. I mean, how you, or how, who was it? Cassie, who explains the
Cassie Neiman.
breakdown.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it really is she shares with you how to tailor make it yourself, but the videos were also super helpful to know how to have right form. And then there was this meeting every week. You meet up, and then you get to ask questions and share, and I think part of the community is actually the one of the best parts of doing this, because someone's going through it with you who's very much like you. And if I recall, even the programs for all women, most of the women I saw in the group were at peri and postmenopausal age.
Definitely. Yeah, we see that in most of our courses. And I like that element too. All the courses that Feisty does are done cohort style, they call it, which is, as you're saying, it's that community where you have, and it gives you, so you're in that, it's a Zoom session, but you're in that group with the expert who has done the course or has done the program, and you can ask your specific questions. And there's this magic that happens when women are bouncing this stuff off of each other, like, oh, I had that too, and I tried this, that, and the other thing. Or there's a real synergy that happens when women all get together in a room like that, that the energy is just so good. And I think that they lift and inspire each other in ways that you wouldn't have just on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the quality of the speakers is second to none. It's people who really know what they're doing, but also understands the audience as well. And again, I trust them. I know it's half of them, but I do trust the Feisty Media team in terms of choosing the right women and to go through this. There was a great section on injury prevention as well,
Hmm.
and that was very important for
It's
me
really
now.
important. Yeah, I thought Dina did a bang up job with the nutrition, because a lot of people have that idea cardio burns calories and you don't need to like maybe eat as much for strength. And she's like, hold the press. So she talks
Yes.
about like how you should be eating for strength training, which I thought was very, very useful.
I like her approach too, because I do still see bodybuilders who are still in the calorie in, calorie out thing. And I understand that there's a point. I mean, okay, yeah, there's a point where you eat too much, and of course, but it's not just that.
Yeah.
And they're very much about calorie counting. And it's just, I'm so over that. And I can't believe they're still doing this.
It's an
Yes.
inexact science. We could do a whole show on that. Like the calories you see on the package is an inexact science. The calories that you think you're burning, the fact that when people meticulously try to do that, I'm like,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Dina's got it well. I'm really excited about this course, and it is going to be launching. When is it? December 1st, right? You'll have a kickoff for the next cohort.
Yep. So it goes on sale November 13th through the 20th, and then cohort kicks off December 1st.
So if you want in on this course, you got to take advantage of that week. You only got 1 week to try to get in, because after that it closes, and that's how this
Yep.
system
It's
works.
the
I
last
did.
one for the year.
Yeah, and that's when I
Woo!
did Dr. Stacy Sims Menopause for Athletes course. It was similar to that. This the whole cohort thing, which I think is great, but you got to get on it. I will have links to the course in the show notes, so you can go grab it now. Better now than later. And it's a 16-week training plan, but do you know, is how long is the whole cohort? Because I zoomed right through it, because I
Oh
was in
boy,
the
they're
cohort.
all 6 to 8 weeks, so I'm not going to remember exactly. I want to say six,
Okay.
but I would have to look at it. They're all in it in sort of that range.
Okay. Very cool. So I have links to that. It's womensperformance.com, the strong course.
Yep.
Exactly. I'll have the link there. Grab that in the show notes. And I will have a couple of episodes that Selene and I did together as well in the show
Mm.
notes. You can find Selene on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, her website. And again, I'll have all of this in the show notes. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before I let you go?
Not really. I mean, I just think if I leave you with nothing else, muscle is your currency for a healthy, vibrant aging. To make your health span match your lifespan, you want to bank and maintain as much as you can, just as you would your 401k. So think of it that way.
I love it. Great ending. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to have you on again. You're a regular here. It's just like coming home to have you on here.
Yeah, I always love talking to you. Thank you for what you do too.
All right. Have a great day.